there? Who's out there? Pastor Sam and the Gospel Gunslingers coming at you with your Thanksgiving special. We're going to have a blast. You know, the Puritans were Gospel Gunslingers. And we're going to look at, I made this shocking assertion before, so we're going to look at it in greater depth. I made the shocking assertion that the conflicts that occurred between the native nations and the Puritans were because France, a papist power, had infected the Indian nations with their papacy. That the French went in under cover of the fur trade. There were companies that backed them also. They fortified the Americas before the Pilgrims ever got there. You know, if you look at the phonetic alphabet that the military and all pilots use, every word has to do with victory. V is victor. Or something that has to do with military life. U is uniform. P is Papa. Every soldier misses theirs and hopes to live to be one. So what is Q? Quebec. Now maybe they were just struggling like X-ray for X to find something that started with that. Or maybe the city of Quebec is a very, very key fortification. And I will tell you that the latter is true. Quebec has been referred to as the Gibraltar of the Americas. So as the British, for some time before and centuries after these writings, fortified the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea with their fortifications on Gibraltar and controlled access across those straits into and out of the Mediterranean. Key point held by the British for centuries, still held by the British. The Gibraltar of the Americas is Quebec. Quebec, the fortress of Quebec. In all of North and South America, you can go 8,000 miles down to the very tip of Chile. I'm actually a little closer than that. There is not another fortified city, a walled city in the Americas. If you go to Europe or even Britain, it's full of castles and walled cities. There's an entire region in Spain called Castilla, because during the 800 years of war between the Spanish peoples and the Moors, different castles were built. The Moors would advance a little bit and they'd build a castle, and then the Spanish would advance a little bit and they'd take over those castles and expand them and build new ones. So there's this whole region that's just full of castles. It's full of walled cities, citadels, and military fortifications from medieval and ancient times. None of that exists in the Americas. There's only one, and the city is Quebec, the famed city of Quebec. So we're going to talk a little bit about how William Bradford, the governor of Plymouth Colony for 37 years, tells about how the French and other scoundrels that were like the French, now we're all friends now, the French in this time, they were one of the Pope's faithful empires in the world. And when they came into the north, when the Spanish came into the south, the French were chartered by the Pope to come in and settle North America. And so they set up trading operations, and most importantly, they set up this military fortress. And that predates the Pilgrims. It predates the Pilgrims. So the fact that the seed that the Pilgrims planted grew and eventually forced the French out of Canada, the Spanish out of the southern lands, and the English out of our own nation, it's astounding. It is an inconceivable accomplishment. And we're going to talk about how the Pilgrims did that. So thanks for coming along. I'm Pastor Sam, and you are at GospelGunslingers.com. I love the Pilgrims. These were some of the original Gospel Gunslingers. I'm going to take your questions too. These Pilgrims, as far as their belief, they were very, very advanced. As far as their capability as warriors, they were a little bit behind the game. They were trying to play catch up. First of all, they were, most of them, far beyond military age. People only yell when I start to preach. You know, when I start to preach, the other thing that will happen is the soccer team will score a goal, and everybody in the city will go crazy. The city actually shakes if it's the national team playing. So thank you for being patient, and as we work with what we got. So let's see, I want to talk about the first encounter where the Pilgrims and the Indians, this was the first gunfight. This was the first serious gunfight that they got in, where the Indians attacked, they had to defend themselves, and they kind of got caught with their pants down. So we're going to hash through the first encounter, some very key tactical stupidities that were done by the Pilgrims. You know, I always appreciate it when a good guy like this young Wisconsinner wins his gunfight. But the fact is, as an instructor in self-defense and some degree of tactics, sometimes they Forrest Gump their way through it. And sometimes God just reaches in and pulls them out of the doo-doo. That's what happened with that kid. This boy, he was as green as a gourd. I asked my dad if gourds were green. He said, well, green ones are. But you know, as in the vernacular of mountain men, somebody who's green has very little experience and very little kung fu. They get out there, they don't know what to eat. And of course, in our celebration of Thanksgiving, we want to remember that that William Bradford made a peace with Chief Massasoit, and at the account of his writing 24 years later, he said, with whom after friendly entertainment and some gifts given him, they made a peace with him, which hath now continued this 24 years in these terms. And they had basic laws for their interaction with the native peoples. Isn't that amazing? To Squanto, from this meeting where Bradford made the accord with Chief Massasoit, the great Sachem, is that right? The great Sachem. When they had this meeting, he brought to Squanto, the famous English-speaking Indian, who was of the lands of Patuxet. His tribe had all perished from disease. So he was a stranger and a pilgrim. He was living with other nations, and they might have been cousins and had related language groups, but Squanto was a stranger and a pilgrim among them, and he was a Christian amongst heathen people. And so Bradford writes, the aforesaid Squanto continued with them and was their interpreter, and was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. He directed them how to set their corn, where to take fish, and to procure other commodities, and was also their pilot to bring them to unknown places for their profit, and never left them till he died. He was a native of this place, and scarce any left alive besides himself. He was carried away with divers others by one Hunt, a master of a ship, who thought to sell them for slaves in Spain, but he got away for England. So, who were these slave traders that came before? Well, by 1620, it's a lot of years after 1492, so the New World was known, and different renegades, and especially papal expeditions, came to the New World. So that's where you get these slave traders and fur traders, and that's where you also get the founding of the city of Quebec. All right, let's look at the first encounter, because it's really the first gunfight in our great nation, and where the Pilgrims had to defend themselves. It's amazing how negotiating from a position of strength is so effective in dealing with bullies. You can just shut them right down if they know that you're going to be a hard target and you're going to be difficult to vanquish, that you're not going to be a victim. You know, even the animals do this. This is why the the springbok and the antelopes and even white-tailed deer, they'll jump up out of the brush and they'll make a few leaps just to make it very clear that they're prepared to flee or to fight, that you're dealing with a strong animal. They let every predator know that it's going to be difficult to take them down. And if they can't do that, well, then the predator's like, all right, easy day. Let's go in and back cleanup. It's what we do. Okay, so this is chapter 10 of William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation, a very famous book that we discussed in the prior volume, our prior video, that this book was lost for the better part of a century. It was actually taken by the British in the lead up to the Revolutionary War, and it did not resurface until 1855. And then it was 1897 by the time this book actually came to the Americas. So when you hear this myth that Thanksgiving is a myth, it's that the history was blotted out largely by the loss of this book, which is the primary source of what actually happened in Plymouth Colony. Unless you want to try to infer something from the different layers of totem poles that date from those centuries, feel free. Okay, so another thing you'll hear is that the Pilgrims were grave robbers and desecrators of burial grounds, but here's how Bradford describes it. There was found 2 of their houses covered with mats and sundry of their implements in them, but the people were run away and could not be seen. Also there was found more of their corn and of their beans of various colors. The corn and beans they brought away. There you go. This is where the tale comes from, that the Pilgrims stole all the Indian stuff. The corn and beans they brought away, purposing to give them full satisfaction when they should meet with any of them, as about 6 months afterward they did, to their good content. So, from the beginning, they intended to make good on everything that they took for their survival in the New World. And here is to be noted a special providence of God and a great mercy to this poor people, that here they got seed to plant them corn the next year, or else they might have starved, for they had none, nor any likelihood to get it until the season had been past. Neither is it likely, because it was wintertime. Okay. This is all in very, very old English. Alright, so they paid back for everything that they borrowed, and the finding of those corns and beans which they kept for seed saved their lives. Okay, this is getting to the first encounter. The first gunfight in all the Americas. Here we go. The month of November being spent in these affairs and much foul weather falling in, the 6th of December they sent out their shallop again. So this is a small sailing boat that they're using to navigate Cape Cod and some of the little rivers that flow into Cape Cod and explore and find a place for their settlement and look for what they need. They had to get it out and hammer on it a little bit, to get it seaworthy. They sent out their shallop again with 10 of their principal men and some seamen. So that's 10 of the Pilgrims themselves, of which there were only 19 to start with, men. Upon further discovery, intending to circulate that deep bay of Cape Cod, the weather was very cold and it froze so hard as the spray of the sea lighting on their coats, they were as if they had been glazed. Yet that night betimes they got down into the bottom of the bay. So they see 10 or 12 Indians busy about something. And then they find that they're cleaning fish. I'll skip ahead here. They came also to the place where they saw the Indians the night before and found they had been cutting up a great fish like a grampus, being some 2 inches thick, fat like a hog, some pieces whereof they had left by the way. And the shallop found 2 more of these dead fishes on the sands, a thing usual after storms in that place, by reason of the great flats of sand. So they ranged up and down all day, but found no people nor any place they liked. When the sun grew low, they hasted out of the woods to meet with their shallop, to whom they made signs to come to them in a creek hard by, the which they did at high water. So the tide was in, and this would allow them to get the shallop up the creek. They find themselves up the creek just a little bit when the Indians actually attack. So keep in mind the location of their boat, the beach. It all plays into this battle. They had not seen each other all the day since the morning, so they made them a barricade, as usually they did every night, with logs, stakes, and thick pine boughs, the height of a man, leaving it open to leeward, partly to shelter them from the cold and wind, making their fire in the middle and lying round about it, and partly to defend them from any sudden assaults of the savages if they should surround them. So being very weary, they betook them to rest. All right, so in Africa they call this a boma, a thorn fence, a thorn hedge that they build around them, so to resist anyone from coming in, or even an animal from coming in. It's of limited effectiveness, and it's pretty rudimentary, but this is what they did, and they did keep a guard. And they did have some muskets. How few they had and how sharp they were not, we'll see. There it is, the soccer team scored. Goal. All right. It's okay. Wasn't an earthquake. The world did not end. It was just the scoring of a goal by one small soccer team in Mexico. Not even quite sure who's playing. Okay. So they're all resting around their fire in their barricado. But about midnight, they heard a hideous and great cry, and their sentinel called, "Arm! Arm!" So they bestirred them and stood to their arms and shot a couple of muskets, and the noise ceased. Amazing what a few gunshots will do. They concluded it was a company of wolves, or such like wild beasts. For one of the seamen told them he had often heard such a noise in Newfoundland. So one of these seamen had been on these expeditions by the French. All right. Yeah, the super spy says in a famous movie, he says, whenever there's a doubt, there's not any doubt. But the Pilgrims convinced themselves that it was just some wild animals, and that it was not the very Indians that they'd seen earlier in the day that ran away, that knew they were there, that skulked up on them in the night and let out a war whoop. I guess they hadn't watched very many black and white movies from the 50s. Oh yeah, this was the 1600s. All right. So they convinced themselves it was wolves or some kind of wild beasts. So they rested till about 5 o'clock in the morning. For the tide and their purpose to go from thence made them be stirring betimes. So they wanted to get up early and get the boat out before the tide went out. So after prayer, they prepared for breakfast. So they get up at the crack of dawn, check their boat, go to prayer, and prepare their breakfast. Amazing. You know, these men were out on an expedition. For them to eliminate their daily study and their daily devotions would have been very, very easy. But they didn't do that. They get up at 5 in the morning and they had their prayer. They had their time with the Lord. Noble. They prepared for breakfast, and it being day dawning, it was thought best to be carrying things down to the boat. All right, so this is where they start making boneheaded moves. splitting up, leaving weapons behind, not having their weapons at the ready. You know, I was reading Chris Kyle's his annals of War in the Sandbox, and he had a machine gunner, a saw gunner, that would run with him. I think he was actually running an M60, which is heavier than the saw. And it's, depending on the variant, it's 21 pounds or 23 pounds plus ammo belts and maybe the bipods extra. So that's a heavy gun, you know. And this gunner, Kyle, had drilled and drilled and drilled into him that he needed to have his gun up, not just have his gun with him, not just kind of be pointing it in the right direction, but have his gun up when they were moving around corners and moving through the city. This guy was expected to have his gun up. Well, eventually they get in a scrape, and that guy takes a hit. He got shot, and he said, "Sorry, I'm sorry, sir." But even when he took that hit, he had his gun up. Had his gun up. Well, the Pilgrims got their guns like wrapped up in their coats, but they were also running rock locks. You know, this was way, way back in the day where keeping your powder dry was a huge challenge. And so they've got ice, they've got salt spray, they've got dew, and they got to try to keep their flints dry, right? Or it's just not going to work. So let's see what they did. So they got to go down to the boat. The fact that they left the boat unguarded is just its own shock. But some said it was not best to carry the arms down. Others said they would be the readier, for they had lapped them up or wrapped them up in their coats from the dew. So they kind of had a reason to try to keep their guns dry so that they'd be some good. But at the same time, they sure didn't have them up. But some 3 or 4 would not carry theirs, that is, carry their guns down, till they went themselves. Yet as it fell out, the water being not high enough, they laid them down on the bankside and came up to breakfast. So they're waiting for the tide to come in so they can get their shallop out of the creek. And when they do this, they go down there and see, ¿Me puede traer otro café, por favor? They go down to check the shallop. The tide's not come in yet, and they said, well, we gotta we're gonna have to hang out and take a leisurely breakfast. So what do? They leave their guns wrapped up in their coats down on the beach with the shallop in the creek. Almost cost them their hide. And you see that there's an argument amongst them. Some of these pilgrims are like, guys, you got to keep your gun up. You got to be ready to rumble here. You know, we saw Indians yesterday. They know we're here. They ran away from us. We heard howls during the night. What the heck's going on? Keep your gun up. All right, the other ones were like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. So which one are you? I'll tell you what. Most of my friends are like, it'll be okay. What are you worried about? Nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. Something happens. Came up to breakfast. They laid them down on the bank side and came up to breakfast. But presently, all on the sudden, they heard a great and strange cry, which they knew to be the same voices they heard in the night, though they varied their notes. And one of their company, being abroad, came running in and cried, "Men, Indians, Indians!" And withal, their arrows came flying amongst them. Their men ran with all speed to recover their arms. And then Bradford tells how the Lord helped them when they had their bacon was in the fire, right? They ran with all speed to recover their arms, as by the good providence of God they did. In the meantime, of those that were there ready, 2 muskets were discharged at them, and 2 more stood ready in the entrance of the rendezvous, but were commanded not to shoot until they could take full aim at them. And the other 2 charged with all speed, that is, loaded in the muzzle. I have a great black powder tutorial on my YouTube here. You'll just have to search for it, but It's in there. Look up black powder tutorial. Finally, my neighbors have left. Man, how can only 2 people create such a gaggle of noise? This is like the wild Indians, I guess. So they fired 2 muskets and they only had 2 left. 2 single shots. And that's why the order came. Who gave that order? Maybe their military captain, Miles Standish. Somebody that had been in some wars. Said, don't fire until you have full aim. Until they can make a certain killing shot. And the other 2 muskets were charged again with all speed. For there were only 4 had arms there and defended the barricado which was first assaulted. The cry of the Indians was dreadful, especially when they saw their men run out of the rendezvous, running out with coats of mail on and cutlasses in their hands. So they at least made their dash for the shallop with their coats of mail. They had armor on and they had cutlasses. And then they succeed in making it to the boat and to their weapons. If they wouldn't have split up the team, or if everybody would have been armed, this would not have been such a dangerous situation. They later addressed these deficiencies. Okay. Run towards the shallop to recover their arms, the Indians wheeling about upon them. But some running out with coats of mail on and cutlasses in their hands, they soon got their arms and let fly amongst them and quickly stopped their violence. So he does not talk about whether they wounded or killed of the Indians. He just says that their attack was quickly stopped. Sounds to me like a euphemism. I think they hit pay dirt at that point. Then he tells about this brave Indian warrior. Yet there was a lusty man, and no less valiant, stood behind a tree within half a musket shot, and let his arrows fly at them. He was seen shoot 3 arrows, which were all avoided. He stood 3 shot of a musket. So 3 muskets were fired at him as he was partly behind the tree firing his arrows, till one taking full aim at him and made the bark or splinters of the tree fly about his ears, after which he gave an extraordinary shriek, and away they went all of them. So all you got to do is fight 1 or 2 of the toughest. They left some to keep the shallop and followed them about a quarter of a mile and shouted once or twice and shot off 2 or 3 pieces and so returned. So they pursued the battle, which is something that they evidently learned from the Bible, where pursuit of the enemy, without firearms, this is how battles were wound up and ended. So here we go. This they did that they might conceive that they were not afraid of them or in any way discouraged. If they had showed weakness at this point, it would have really encouraged the Indians to come after them. And then here's Bradford's synopsis. Thus it pleased God to vanquish their enemies and to give them deliverance. And by his special providence, there were no hospitals, right? No antibiotics. This is where you get peg-legged men out walking around on a pirate ship, because the recipe of the day to deal with war wounds was amputation. God, by his special providence, so to dispose that not any one of them were either hurt or hit, though their arrows came close by them, and on every side them, and sundry of their coats which hung up in the barricado were shot through and through. Afterward they gave God solemn thanks. But what a different era. After a battle in Vietnam, they all went down to the whorehouse that the chaplain showed them on the edge of base, where the corpsmen went and checked the ladies every month or so. Not these men. They gave thanks to God. Solemn thanks. and praise for their deliverance, and gathered up a bundle of arrows, and sent them into England afterward by them of the ship, and called that place the First Encounter. From hence they departed, and coasted all along. So they finally pick a place to build Plymouth Colony. But boy, they were different people after that first encounter. And if you go to the Plymouth Museum today, there's a replica of the blockhouse. You know, a 2-story fortification, which was then inside of a palisade wall, that additional shelters were built inside of that wall. They mounted cannons on that blockhouse, and it had a cantilever on top so that they could defend it all around with gunfire. And they did this on purpose, and this is part of the reason that they found not only peace with Massasoit, but they found that the Indians were willing to make treaties of mutual defense, and that they were willing to even lay down their punitive expeditions against other tribes because they were shown a better way by these Christian people. There was bloodshed, just not as much as they were used to. These people had been in wars of extermination for generations. No written history, just constant. Them hated and hating one another, the Bible says. All right. Before we move on to the city of Quebec and the French expeditions, I'm going to tweet out the link because there's a lot of people that normally come that are not here with us. So let's take a short intermission. If you want to grab a fresh cup of coffee, go ahead and do that. And we will, in a couple of minutes, get into the French settlement, the fortress of Quebec. All right. Here we go. I think I have the slowest computers in the world. How is this possible? Stay with me. All right. Make sure you hit the bell on all platforms. You know, a lot of things just get broadcast here or there, not everywhere. So make sure you're signed up on Twitter. I probably haven't tweeted in 10 days. I'm going to start tweeting. But I don't tweet a whole bunch of stuff. Let's see if I'm even in on the Wi-Fi. It's just slow as can be. I was watching a documentary on the Patuxet Museum, Plymouth Patuxet, and it's a living history museum. You know, there are people there today, many of them from the First Nations of that area that man the Indian village, and then there are many relatives, descendants of the Pilgrims. Hey, salud! And the relatives of the Pilgrims play the roles of individual known persons that were. If I don't straighten my pinky finger all the way when I do that, then they say I'm doing the devil horns. So here we go. Individual persons. People think I'm judgmental, right? Come on, baby. Everybody be cool. Let's just rock. I'll have people pick it up later. It's what happens when I don't have my homework done. This long voyage in their inaccommodate, that is uncomfortable condition, had brought upon them other diseases and scurvy, so as there died sometimes 2 or 3 of a day in the aforesaid time. That of 100 and odd persons, scarce 50 remained. And you know, some of them sailed back on the Mayflower. So by the time that what Bradford calls the starving time was completed, they were down to maybe 30 people in Plymouth Colony. Some of them children. Okay. Couple things before we get into Quebec. All of this while, the Indians came skulking about them and would sometimes show themselves aloof of, but when any approached near them, they would run away. And at once they stole away their tools where they had been at work and were gone to dinner. You don't leave your tools that you brought from another continent and go to dinner. My brother bought a property up in the hood years ago, and he was gonna, rent it out and make some money and then build a little bit, right? Which he did. But he had to do a lot of work on these houses. They were dilapidated properties, so he got his chainsaw out. He was going to saw up all the fallen trees and logs, and he was just deep in the ghetto. Thank you, Edgar. We need a good joke. Tell us about the barrio, Edgar. Tell me if this isn't how it is. So my brother has his I think was driving an SUV. He gets his chainsaw out, gets it out on the tailgate, and you got to gas up your chainsaw. You got to run the file on your chainsaw, sharpen it up a little bit. So he's got it there, and he walked around the back of the house. Just walked around the back of the house to get something, and walked back. His chainsaw's gone. Nobody's around. Just that fast, within a minute, 2 minutes at the most. So somebody has not spent very much time in the barrio for them to leave their tools, iron tools that they brought from another continent, in the field and go to dinner. But they did that. See, they learned it little by little. I did it again. I went like this, and it wasn't bent all the way. So the Indians stole away their tools. But about the 16th of March, a certain Indian came boldly amongst them and spoke to them in broken English, which they could well understand, but marveled at it. At length they understood by discourse with him that he was not of these parts, but belonged to the eastern parts, where some English ships came to fish, with whom he was acquainted, and could name sundry of them by their names, amongst whom he had got his language. He became profitable to them in acquainting them with many things concerning the state of the country, also of the people here, of their names, number, and strength. So now for the first time, Bradford and the Pilgrims get to start making a map of, okay, here's this nation. Here, this is the name of the chief. This is how many they are. This is what are they warlike? Are they farmers? Are they hunters? Do they fish? They start to get an idea of the other nations that are around about them, of their situation and distance from this place, and who was chief amongst them. His name was Samoset. He told them also of another Indian whose name was Squanto, a native of this place who had been in England and could speak better English than himself. Being after some time of entertainment and gifts dismissed, a while after he came again, and 5 more with him, and they brought again all the tools that were stolen away before, and made way for the coming of their great Sachem chief called Massasoit, who about 4 or 5 days after came with the chief of his friends and other attendants, with the aforesaid Squanto, with whom after friendly entertainment and some gifts given him, they made a peace with him, which hath now continued this 24 years in these terms. All right, so this great peace that they made with the Pilgrims, how did it wind up in war? Because we know it eventually did. If you watch TV today, if you listen to a liberal leftist teacher, they'll tell you that war broke out from the very beginning. Okay, maybe with the French in their papist advance. Definitely with the Spanish, with their conquest, they came in shooting. But right here, we have Bradford's own account that 24 years until this was written, the peace was still undisturbed that they'd made with Massasoit and then with many other nations. So let's see what Bradford says. And they had people among them that were like the French. And they punished some of them, but they also made some errors. So let's see what Bradford says. It's kind of a shocker. Now to the French. Now to maintain this riotous prodigality, and profuse excess, Morden thinking himself lawless. This Morton we're going to talk about. Hearing what gain the French and fishermen made by trading of pieces, that is guns, powder and shot to the Indians, he, as the head of this consortship, began the practice of the same in these parts. So he tells that the French had been dealing with the Indians, evangelizing the Indians, with their Jesuit priests and stuff, and how they armed the Indians specifically to be a thorn in the side of these colonists. Just today it was in the news, in the last 24 hours, that the head of Exterior Relations, the Secretary of State of Mexico, was sitting at the UN, and he was talking all this UN policies about arms control, making guns illegal, Mexican government suing different firearms manufacturers in the United States, because this problem still exists. You have got sappers and delinquents that are in the colonies, they're in government, and they are arming delinquent groups. Does that mean that disarmament is the solution? No, absolutely not. But the fact that you've got delinquents arming criminal groups, the French were doing it on an industrial scale. And the real shock about Plymouth Colony is that there was ever a survival, that they ever made it out, that they ever survived. And our opening slide is a map of the English, French, and Spanish territories in the New World. And yes, we did conquer this nation. We took it from the Spanish, the French, and the English. You'll hear it told another way. All right. So let's go back and now let's talk about Morden first. So Morden was such a troublemaker that he was involved in slave trading. He brought workers from Europe and then went to Virginia plantation and basically contracted out their labor. So they were basically slaves. And this is where the Pilgrims come in. The Plymouth Colony had actually gotten some degree of strength in 10 or 15 years. And they actually got these people to throw Morden out. But they had been such rascals. He calls them a rascal. And if you stay until this rascal return, you will also be carried away and sold for slaves with the rest. Therefore, I would advise you to thrust out this Lieutenant Fitcher. And I, having a part in the plantation, will receive you as my partners and consociates. So it's a little bit complicated how Morden got this. Okay, so it was Morden that actually said that. Anyhow, men stealers. Something that the Bible says in Revelation, that the whore of Babylon trades in bodies and souls of men. Regardless, this group was just deviant. And after they had gotten some good into their hands and got much by trading with the Indians, they spent it as vainly in quaffing and drinking both wine and strong waters in great excess, and as some reported, 10 something worth in the morning. Who knows how much liquor that is. They also set up a maypole. So he's talking about pagan worship from the old world coming in and infecting these licentious communities. And they literally set up a maypole. You know, in the Bible we have Asherah poles and we have groves, and all through the wars of the Bible, one backsliding king will construct these things, and then it's some time before the nation tears them down, and it seems that they never go far enough. They never removed the temple prostitutes, you know, the sodomites out of the land, because there were both male and female prostitution at these heathen festivals in the Bible. And lo and behold, as the Pilgrims are trying to establish a foothold in the New World, this other community comes up and sets up a maypole. They also set up a maypole, drinking and dancing about it many days together, inviting the Indian women for their consorts, dancing and frisking together like so many fairies, or furies rather, and worse practices. You wonder what it was that was unspeakable that was going on, if they're all screwing under the maypole. And he mentions that, as if they had anew revived and celebrated the feasts of the Roman goddess Flora, or the beastly practices of the mad Bacchanalians. Morden, likewise, to show his poetry, composed sundry rhymes and verses, some tending to lasciviousness, and others to the detraction and scandal of some persons, which he affixed to this idol, or idol maypole. They changed also the name of their place, and instead of counting it Mount Wollaston, they call it Marymount. You know, there's a place called Marymount today. There's Marymount College. One would wonder if the roots of it are from this in the 1630s. They called it Marymount as if this jollity would have lasted forever, but this continued not long, for after Morton was set for in England, as follows to be declared. Shortly after came over that worthy gentleman, Mr. John Endicott, who brought over a patent under the broad seal for the government of Massachusetts, who visiting those parts caused the maypole to be cut down, and rebuked them for their profanities, and admonished them to look there should be better walking. So they now, or others, changed the name of their place again, and called it Mount Dagon. Dagon, of course, being the heathen god from the book of Judges that the Lord humbled. And sent tumors in the gonads of all those that opposed. No, I think we're in 1 Samuel now. I think we've moved from Judges into 1 Samuel, find the account of Dagon. Okay, it continues. This Morden, having thus taught them the use of pieces, guns, he had his own fast and furious operation. He sold them all he could spare, and he and his consorts determined to send for many out of England, and had by some of the ships sent for above a score. So he would get 20 muskets from one ship and go out and trade them with the Indians. The which being known, and his neighbors meeting the Indians in the woods, armed with guns in this sort, it was a terror unto them, who lived stragglingly, and were of no strength in any place. And other places, though more remote, saw this mischief would quietly spread over all, if not prevented. The Pilgrims knew this, that they had to police their number, and that they could not allow traitors. Besides, they saw they should keep no servants, for Morden would entertain any, how vile soever, and all the scum of the country or any discontents would flock to him from all places, if this nest was not broken, and they should stand in more fear of their lives and goods in short time from this wicked and debased crew than from the savages themselves. You know, I'm dealing with this in my neighborhood. I like to pay somebody to do this and that, but then the minute that there's an opportunity for them to run off with the crooks and drug, that's what they do. Or just dance around the maypole, just act lasciviously. lasciviously and foolish. And so the Pilgrims saw, not that they needed to embrace this wickedness and be kind to it and blow kisses to it and bless. No, they saw that this was a threat to their survival, having such a traitor in their midst. They would hire people, they would get contract laborers from Europe, and this guy would take them away into the saloon, Morton. So let's see what they do. They had to go get him. All right. They sent him a letter telling him not to do that. They first resolved jointly to write to him and in a friendly and neighborly way to admonish him to forbear these courses, to stop doing that. The soccer team scored. You know what happened. It's a nation of soccer fans. So the young kid's studying English, and he says to me, the word he was studying was football. And I said, no, not on this continent. Don't tell anybody that. Don't use that in conversation, unless you run into somebody who's flying the Union Jack. There they have footballers. Not in the Americas. Not in American English. So they asked Morton nicely to stop running fast and furious. Hey, how'd that work for us? You know, we could have read the writings of William Bradford and understood that it was not going to work. Just all right. He was so high as he scorned all advice and asked who had to do with him. He had and would trade pieces with the Indians, and despite of all, with many other scurrilous terms full of disdain. They sent, so he bowed up. They sent to him a second time and bade him be better advised and more temperate in his terms, for the country could not bear the injury he did. You feel like anybody's trying to ruin our country today on purpose? It's happened before. So they decide they're going to bust in this guy's door and kick his butt. So he decides that he's not going to obey the king's proclamation, of which the Pilgrims in the Mayflower Compact agreed that they would be subjects of their fear and dread sovereign, King James. And the king had commanded not to give guns to the enemy and prospective enemies. Okay. You know, we have these laws today about exporting weapons, night vision, and we got some idiots giving cajillions of dollars worth of them to the Afghanis. Night vision, avionics, missile guidance, countermeasures, laser guidance, laser designators, etc., etc. Totally illegal to even let that out of the country. So here's what Morton said. They mutually resolved to proceed and obtained. Now, if you see, there's an evolution from here into the Wild West. Eventually, within a couple centuries, it became known that you cannot negotiate with dedicated troublemakers. You got to face them down in the street at high noon and take them down. Our forefathers finally learned that the hard way. They also did not early on have the stomach for going right after the enemy, taking them to the town square. Once it finally happened, everybody cried foul so much that it's a byword even today. All right. Obtained to the governor of Plymouth to send Captain Standish, Miles Standish, their military advisor, and some other aid with him to take Morton by force, which accordingly was done. But they found him to stand stiffly in his defense, having made fast his doors, armed his consorts, sent diverse dishes of powder and bullets ready on the table. Now there's just a semicolon here, but you'll see how the deliverance of God once again helps the very idealistic Pilgrims Forrest Gump their way through this raid. He's so drunk that he can't even hold his musket up. All right. And if they had not been overarmed with drink, more hurt might have been done. They summoned him to yield. So they went and shouted out, yield! Surrender yourself! Thou art surrounded! They should have done that either. They had a warrant for his arrest. You go collar the guy. Okay. They summoned him to yield, but he kept his house, and they could get nothing but scoffs and scorns from him. But at length, the wicked know that they actually hurt our feelings with their bluster and their cussing. They actually know that it affects us. It doesn't affect them at all, to be called names and whatever, but they know it affects us. So his counter-assault, Morden's counter-assault from his cabin is verbal. You rascals, he scoffs and scorns. He and some of his crew came out, but not to yield, but to shoot. But they were so steeled with drink as their pieces were too heavy for them. Himself with a carbine, overcharged and almost half filled with powder and shot, as was after found, had thought to have shot Captain Standish, but he stepped to him and put by his piece and took him. So Captain Standish, the most experienced warrior among them, closes the distance on Morden as he's drunk trying to get his gun up. Standish closes the distance, takes him down with a knuckle sandwich, and took him. Neither was any hurt done to any of either side, save that one was so drunken he ran his own nose upon the point of a sword, and one held before him as he entered the house, but he lost but a little of his hot blood. All right, they missed a great opportunity to take this guy down once and for all. I hope the gospel gunslingers out there learn the lesson that you don't take another additional risk and let the guy live and go on in court and then some liberal leader rise up and pardon him. That's how you wind up with a crook as the president of your country, which has happened now in Argentina and Bolivia. Oh, and the USA. She didn't get locked up, did she? Yeah, this is what happens. Morden they brought away to Plymouth, where he was kept till a ship went from the Isle of Shoals for England, with which he was sent to the Council of New England, and letters written to give them information of his course and carriage, so they send their indictment with him. And also one was sent at their common charge to inform their honors more particularly and to prosecute against him. So they send a witness back to England to testify against him. But he fooled of them the messenger after he was gone from hence, and though he went for England, yet nothing was done to him, not so much as rebuked, for aught was heard, but returned the next year. Some of the worst of the company were dispersed, but some of the more modest kept the house till he should be heard from. But I have been too long about so unworthy a person and a bad cause. Yeah, that's what happens when you send somebody away to a court in a place that's full of corruption, full of... Let me just tell you, unless you're in an aggressive time, a Cromwellian time, you cannot let criminals go before the justice seat in this very recent policy of long-term imprisonment. And the colonists learned it the hard way. After this, they really began to make more executions. Okay. Quebec, Quebec, Quebec. Let's see where we're at. Meanwhile, further up the St. Lawrence, there's a few more points I want to make about Quebec. I believe it was 1521 that Giovanni Verrazzano, for whom the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge, one of the longest and greatest suspension bridges in our whole country, was named. He sailed the eastern seaboard from Florida to Newfoundland and made notes and mapped a lot of it. So he was an Italian, but he was contracted by the French government, which again was a papal power, moving into the New World for the opposite purpose of the Pilgrims, moving in to make a buck and to claim lands for the crown and to subjugate foreign peoples, to meet interesting people and kill them. So after that, Jacques Cartier was working for the French. Verrazzano had died on his final voyage. Jacques Cartier, in 1534, made the first of 3 expeditions. So this is 80-some years before the Pilgrims. He made the first of 3 expeditions. This is how the Pilgrims knew something of the New World, is there were adventurers that had gone here or there. What made them different is that they were a religious sect. They were believers that wanted to just be free. They weren't trying to make a buck. They weren't trying to take anybody slaves. They wanted to escape slavery themselves. And that's why they are fittingly seen as the root and the seed of this nation. Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec in 1608. So this is the fortress of Quebec. And if you sail up the St. Lawrence River, it's a huge river, you know, that cargo ships go up today and then lock into the Great Lakes, take our iron ore out of Duluth, Minnesota, and run it over to China to be smelted. There's all kinds of heavy ships that go in and out of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Well, there's a point where it narrows to only a little over a kilometer. Sorry for shaking my table. It narrows to where a cannon can be shot all the way across. And it's commanded by a high bluff, 98 meters high. And this is where the citadel of Quebec was founded in 1608. So somebody said to me, Sam, why do they speak French in Canada? And I said, well, there were centuries of war between the English and the French. And of course, the most famous phase of this is the French and Indian Wars. But this went back and forth for centuries because the Pope had wisely fortified this key point in the St. Lawrence River and never let go of it. Really, once they let go of it, the English took the fort in 1629, then was returned to the French by treaty in 1632. But then it was a couple hundred more years that the English were battering away trying to get rid of that fort, because if they could take that fort and fortify it themselves, then it would be the end of the papal dominions. Remember that even though England was an imperial power, it is the first Protestant nation. England is the first Protestant nation. They had become like the Pope in a lot of ways, which is why we as Americans had to declare independence and to fight them. But they have stood and really continue to stand against the Pope. Let me tell you, the Pope hates Queen Elizabeth. He hates Queen Elizabeth. And the fact that she's willing to stand up to him is no end of infuriation for him. And the fact that United States presidents go and visit the Pope is just the height of ludicrousness. After founding the citadel of Quebec in 1608, 16 of 25 men that built the fortress and manned it died that winter. So, of course, the popes poured a lot of blood into the Americas. And before long, they controlled the Great Lakes. They controlled Hudson Bay. It was, I believe, Samuel de Champlain who, speaking with Indians, was told that there was an inland sea, which he found tantalizing, really. And of course, that would be Hudson Bay. And it was true that there was a vast inland sea. And the French commanded that. You know, the Hudson Bay Trading Company came in, and all through the northern U.S. states, Montana, modern Idaho, Washington, mountain men were up there running the fur trade, making alliances with Indian nations, and managing those lands, you know, establishing themselves in those lands, to include the Mississippi River. And eventually there was conflict between the Spanish and French, and that's where Jefferson came in with Lewis and Clark, and in 1803 executed the Louisiana Purchase and sent Lewis and Clark to explore it. So a lot happened just between 1620 and 1803 as far as the English colonies, the American settlements really expanding. And then there were independence movements in Latin America starting in 1806. This went on. Vast wars began in 1810 in Mexico, and it was not until the Spanish-American War in the 1900s. This is Teddy Roosevelt in San Juan Hill. It was not until the Spanish-American War and the willingness of Teddy Roosevelt to make it a global war and to go seize Spain's other possession, the Philippines, that got the Spanish and the European powers out of the Americas. It's only been 100 years. It's only been 100 years that we've really had these powers out of America. And it all goes back to the Pilgrims. And you know what? Now they're creeping in again. These troublemakers and their vine of Sodom is all over our nation again. And we're just going to have to rise to the occasion and learn the lessons and learn from the naivety of these original gunslingers that you need to be a little bit more assertive and aggressive when you have the upper hand, because if you just let everybody go when they cry foul or squeal, then they'll come back to get you, just like Morden did. So, there we go. A few things that you might not have known about the great United States, about Plymouth Colony. This is a really worthy read. You can find it online. Just look up William Bradford, and the book is called Of Plymouth Plantation. So this is part of it. These are really just excerpts, but and this is in modern type. It's still very, very old English, but you'll find your way through it. So have fun with that, and please spread and share. You know, we've got a generation that knows nothing of where we came from. They're going to sit up from their turkey dinner, burp, and run off to the store and stand in line for Black Friday. They're going to make it all about the Christ Mass, which is a papal holiday. It's, you know, weeks and weeks away. And they're looking towards the worship of the solstice and the rolling over of the calendar, which is, you know, here again, it's all of Rome. If you look at the annals of the Puritans, sometimes it will list two dates for the same thing because they were resisting transitioning to the Gregorian calendar, knowing that the Pope had done that. They didn't even want to change over to the Pope's calendar. And so those are the people that you're going to be dealing with as you're trying to have a family event and a feast. And they're going to be telling you all about the glories of their Googles. And I hope that you teach them something about our forefathers that went before. All right. God bless everybody. Have a good night.